So there were several reasons. First of all, if you were a Western journalist in the Soviet Union, you were under very strict uh, circumstances. First of all, you could be deported at any time. There was no pretense that you have a right to be a journalist especially as a representative of a capitalist, by which they meant Western paper. Second, it was a complete nightmare getting your articles filed because you had a censor that you had to go through, and the censor's job, whose life depended on it, was to make sure that your story was advantageous to the Soviet Union or at least neutral. And they had all sorts of techniques. They spied on you all the time. They followed you around because you're a foreigner. But also that censor had to answer to somebody. So all the censor has to do is be like, "Look, I having trouble with my supervisor." And the reporter could be like, "Well, can I talk to the supervisor?" It's like, "Well, I'm sorry, that's not possible." And he's on deadline, but it's too bad. Bureaucracy doesn't recognize the needs of deadlines. So there was a lot of pressure on Western journalists to have to get through this net, and that's literally constant. Every story it's going to be a fight. So at a certain point, you're just going to be like, "All right," and you're going to pre-censor yourself. If all right, if I include this, it's not going to get through. What are you supposed to do? I think human beings are naturally, and also a lot of these journalists were pro-Soviet. They thought this is the society of the future. At least everyone's trying to make it a better country for everyone, not like back home where the poor slip between the cracks. We got to do what we can to make this work. And you know, there was a lot of, I don't want to say conspiracy, but within the industry, there was a consensus
Hmm.
that the Stalin was the good guy, and we were, if not the bad guys, certainly not as good in certain regards. So when this news of the famine started percolating, all the other Western journalists, besides Gareth Jones and Malcolm Muggeridge, were saying this isn't true. It's nothing that they haven't seen before. The paper that took the lead in this was the New York Times with their guy Walter Duranty, who had previously won a Pulitzer and had interviewed Stalin, which was an enormously rare honor for a Westerner. And because he has so much experience covering Russia and the Soviet Union, he basically took the lead, and other people followed his lead. He was kind of the dean of the press corps in Russia, and he made a point. And the thing, there's so many quotes I have from him, where he's not only denying that this mass starvation is happening, he's also going after journalists who are questioning the narrative. And he says things like, "Look, this is nothing that the Russians haven't experienced before. They're simply tightening their belts." And it's like, you only have to tighten your belt when you don't have enough food. It's not like they started a new exercise regimen and now their body fat's dropping. That's why would someone tighten their belt? So that was one. And the New York Times had a 13-page article, big headline: Russians hungry, not starving. And he went after Jones. He went after Muggeridge, I believe. No, he did go after Muggeridge. But the point being that this is just propaganda from people who want the Soviet Union to fail. They don't understand what they're building here. He had so many excuses like, "Oh, the reason all these Russians are supposedly leaving their villages to go to the cities isn't because there's no food. It's because they're nomadic. It's tradition. They go from town to town looking for new experiences." And it's just at a certain point, and I think it was 1941, where he was eventually like, or 51 rather, I don't remember. He was like, "Oh, well, I guess I was kind of wrong." And it's like, he's like, any journalist worth his salt can admit when he's wrong. And it's like, well, were you worth your salt? Because he explicitly said there's no point in sending out journalists to look for themselves. I've been through the countryside and everyone's fine. And it's just that the loudest people are making noise, whereas everyone else is doing the work and trying to, and this isn't about famine, but it's about Westerners skeptical about collectivization, which is just simply a new way of farming. And yeah, it was a new way of farming, and the results were by design and also accidentally absolutely catastrophic.